just figured to keep.
Welcome everybody to this month's Zoominar related to sports chaplains, character coaches. We're thrilled to have you with us and being a part of what we're talking about today, which is self-care for sports chaplains and character coaches. A lot of us have had a really tough time in the last 18 months. Extroverted people like me were cut off from the people we really love to serve and to be around, and suddenly we couldn't be there. It's been a brutal 18 months for lots of us, and character coaches, sports chaplains, we are no exception. We want to talk today about how do we care for ourselves, just to make sure we stay in a good frame of mind as we serve together. One of our guests for today is Ross Georgiou. Ross is the CEO of Global Sports Chaplaincy Association. He's living in Germany and serving from there. He's also the founder and former CEO of Sports Chaplaincy New Zealand, pioneering sports chaplaincy in that nation. Again, he's also the chairperson of the Major Sport Event Chaplaincy Council. These folks help put together the chaplaincy that serves at major sporting events around the world. His hard work and passion have directed him toward a whole bunch of different experiences in sports chaplaincy and leadership. He has 3 academic degrees, 2 in theology and 1 in quantity surveying. He's married to Rula, and she's from Thessaloniki, Greece. They have 2 sons, Samuel and Stephanos. Marla, would you please introduce our other guest?
Sure, yes. Our other guest is Aaron Fuller. He is a bivocational pastor, a Lutheran minister in Minnesota, as well as a Navy reservist chaplain. But in terms of the sporting world, he actually went to the U.S. Naval Academy, where he wrestled on their team for 4 years and has continued to coach high school and college level. As in terms of ministry, not only is he a pastor and a Navy chaplain, but he's also served as the ODU wrestling chaplain there at the collegiate level. And from all these positions, he's led an enormous amount of resiliency programs and spirituality programs in these positions, which of course has him able to speak very, very winsomely to our topic today. His approach to chaplaincy draws from his experience as a coach and a former athlete, and also in some of these positions, as well as his own personal interests. He's been doing research on human performance and putting it into practice. The Navy's used him extremely well to speak into some of these areas. Likewise, has multiple degrees of currently working on a DMin, so we'll cheer him on in that regard as well. But excited to have him join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet. You bet. So we'll go ahead and start. I'll toss out our first question for you guys. And again, just so everyone knows, we're looking for a personal perspective, but also both these gentlemen have quite a global perspective as well on self-care, caring for us and other chaplains, character coach type people, what kind of issues we would deal with in terms of caring for ourselves well. So the first question, gentlemen, is what are some areas or points of stress that you have dealt with professionally and then also personally? So just fire away, gentlemen, as you're ready.
Maybe I can go ahead. Thanks, Roger and Marla, for the introduction and for welcoming us. The sorts of things professionally and personally, I think generally speaking at this time, one of the greatest things that we hear is about fatigue and exhaustion, primarily from being in a lockdown sort of situation. That has, I've seen some people, some pastors go as far as wanting to walk away from everything. That's the sort of wording that they would use, and even in their primary spouse relationship also say that there's nothing there for me anymore. Just being almost at the bottom of the barrel, and because it's something that comes up less with our pastors, but more our pastors or our chaplains dealing with the area of abuse, self-abuse or self-harm, and then even suicidal thoughts, or even suicidal attempts. So that's been pretty much the range of sorts of things that I've had. The only other thing that I would add to that briefly is many of the people that I'm dealing with are tired of doing this sort of thing, a Zoom call. And I work with a pastor who's over 200 churches, and he has other pastors working with him, and they just say, I'm no longer going to talk about deeper things by Zoom. I'm going to wait till I can talk to you personally. That's just how far that's got to be. So that gives a little bit of a range of the sorts of things that I've dealt with personally and professionally. Over to you, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. I echo a lot of what you're saying. Kind of what I've heard from professional colleagues, clergy, and then other fellow military chaplains. I think, my spin on this, and kind of to dig a little deeper into it, is the question becomes this: what does it mean when the things that your strengths that help you do your job so well or do your ministry so well are no longer like you can't utilize those? So, I think it was referenced earlier, a lot of our clergy are extroverts and they enjoy the personality piece of it and that connection. What does it mean? You can't leverage those gifts that God's given you to make your ministry effective. And so where I see this cascading effect happen is that, and I think we know this well, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, is that when you start to sense that you can't use those gifts well, that can then move into a sense of loss and grief, and even to a point of shame where I am no longer effective in what I'm doing. And I think personally and professionally that affects us. And we can, we could talk here all day and talk about all the different ways that kind of like plays out in our lives. But I really think for me, that's been the challenge during this time, is that, it's like athletes. The thing I'm doing is no longer working. What do I do? And I think, the added piece of that is some of that we can't change, right? The pandemic is still going on. There are some things we just can't change and control. And I think that can be really, really hard. That's really hard on a lot of the clergy that I've known, personally and professionally, that I've seen.
Excellent. We had a great question come in via the chat here in a moment. I want to throw that in along with this question. How have you dealt with that stress yourself? Any common positive or negative ways you've seen your colleagues deal with it? And one of the questions that came in, this is the third part of this same question, is it possible or even profitable to anticipate and almost front load our self-care as we can see especially difficult schedule or projects coming? Is there a way to get ahead of it in a sense? How have you seen people deal with the stress? And are there any common positive ways or even hurtful ways you've seen people deal with these things? Complicated question, but I think you can handle it.
Yeah, I'll jump on that first. I think, I'd offer this. Most of my colleagues look at self-care as just another thing that they have to do. Like, I have to do it because it makes me better for my job, right? So it's no different than everything else. And so if it's a thing that you have to do, you start kind of taking this idea of like, so should I front load it? When should I weave it in? All I know is this in my personal life, that if I have things, I tend to neglect them until I hit a point where like, oh, I really need that. So I think I would offer this, is that think of it less as a thing that you'd have to front load or kind of budget as like, kind of like a bank or bank it. How do you weave self-care into your everyday life? And so, I'd offer this, and I tell my athletes the same thing as the coach. Like, if you're not, and I tell my colleagues this too, if you're not finding a way to weave and integrate in your own wellness into your ministry, you're always going to be in this place where you hit the stops and things get really rough. But if it's woven in and becomes kind of a routine and a part of your life patterns, then you that's where resiliency is built. That's where I think you don't get these high, peaks and lows, and we can kind of just navigate through.
Great answer. Thank you. Ross, how would you respond?
Yeah, I would just build off what Aaron has said. I think one of the best things is to really know yourself. So know what's actually good for you and know what's bad for you, what is detrimental to you. So for instance, for me, I'm somebody that loves mountain biking, and I try and build that margin, and it's the exercise that's good for me. And that's one of the things that you hear experts in this field say: exercise because of the fact that you're getting in a different environment, you're sweating, you're doing routine, you're getting the endorphins flowing. So know yourself and know what's good for you. And I would say with relationship with others, with your rest patterns, with your eating patterns. I mean, this is basic stuff, but it's just good to remind ourselves of it, and then try and get into a routine of doing those things that are good for us. So that builds very much off what Aaron is saying. The routine should be on a regular basis, not like, oh, I'm in a bad space, I need to start my routine now, or I need to start my exercise now. One of the other things is I think it's pretty hard to front load some things. There are ways one can build margin in, but one of the things that I think is really significant is understanding that the toolkit that you use for normal circumstances may need to be changed for new circumstances. So if I give you an example, if I tried cutting a big thick stone with an angle grinder, one of those saws that cuts, I used it to cut a tile and it did really well. I went to cut the stone with it and I burned it out because I was using the wrong tool. And I think that's really important during these times, that there may be tools that you've never used before, but hey, it's time to use them. And one of those tools I would suggest is actually in talking to those who are experts in the field. So getting other people who may be advisors, counselors that you don't normally use, but use them during these times as a sounding board. Go to that third party to help yourself out and to deal with the extra load or the extra burdens.
That's really good. I think some of us related to this, we may move from crisis to crisis point and never establish really healthy rhythms for this stuff. At age 65, my Fitbit, I pay more attention to my sleep patterns than anything else on my Fitbit. Is, am I sleeping well? Because I can track how sharp my brain is and how other things are feeling, partly based on, am I sleeping well? And so there are other things that are helpful. Go.
To that end, I actually want to toss it to Aaron because I know he does the same, and just with his propensity towards research, Aaron, I know you've appreciated the Aura Ring and things like that, Whoop and such. Would you mind giving us some concrete background on that one too?
Yeah. So I, in my position was, I spent a year in with the Marine Corps, working on kind of the other parts of resiliency. But, you know, there is this big push kind of within, and it's actually within kind of like athletics for like biosensors. So whether that's an Apple Watch, I wear a Whoop strap. I got to try out the Aura Ring. I like the Whoop strap better. Just at the end of the day, it's kind of a personal preference, what you like, whether it's a style thing or just what's more convenient. But I am someone that's learning to really appreciate data, biometric data, because data doesn't lie. And the best way to put it is that the data isn't necessarily kind of this prescriptive thing, but what it's really good at is telling you some objective information that can lead to changing habits. So what's interesting with with Whoop, I can watch and track because it kicks out an algorithm. The algorithm kicks you out a recovery score in a percentage from 100 to 1. So I can tell, here's a perfect example. If I eat like too much pizza for dinner, my recovery is always worse the next day. It is like, I could, like, in fact, like last night, because we had confirmation, I ate way too much pizza. So like my recovery was like 30% today. and I didn't work out yesterday. It was because I ate pizza. And I still got 8.5 hours of sleep. So what that does is that tells me like, okay, maybe I need to moderate because, you know, there's a diet thing there to diagnose. The same is true with working out. I even have it kind of tailored towards like even my own spiritual practices. And I can notice these biometric changes in myself that kind of clue me into something else. So, and I think that's useful for a lot of us, because I think most of us, it's just by our nature as people who care about others, we don't really pay, we'll notice things that are happening with us, whether it's our thoughts or our body or whatever, but we need some sort of accountability partner to tell us, hey, you need to pay attention, because we just kind of write it off. And I have found that these activity biosensors have been a really great way for me to hold me accountable. And I think a lot of different athletes are seeing this. That data is helpful in this respect, and kind of helping us clue in and giving us an objective view.
Mm-hmm.
Ross, do you see, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Roger. It's okay.
Just wanted to follow up with Ross. Do you see folks in Europe using similar sensors or other ways of gathering information that help them track their wellness?
Yeah, I think that people do. I think sometimes they're like, you know, a Fitbit or some sort of tracking device such as that. In Germany, of course, Germans are very big on technology. So, you know, whether it's mountain biking or other sports where they carry something, they want to measure how well they do. Probably more to do with the sport than maybe to do with health, but nevertheless, they definitely like to track it. I could actually give you an example of my last mountain bike, and I could tell you how many altitude meters I climbed and for how many hours I rode, and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
I love it. And so even if somebody doesn't jump down the rabbit hole of like gathering objective data, and you're speaking about like just cluing into how we're doing. I mean, I think most of us come from an athletic background ourselves. And so we know what injury feels like. We know when we've felt recovered or when we haven't felt recovered. There's been times that I can tell my body is stressed, even though I don't feel stressed, because I just recognize that my heart rate's elevated. But it's taking time to notice that, and just, you know, for the good of the group, I've been learning a lot about hormonal response to things, particularly for our ladies. And people will notice that if there's you cannot mitigate the stress that's happening in your life, but you can deal with your thoughts regarding it. And it's been studied as people start talking about the things that are stressful to them, that they have these bodily reactions to it. That is the stress response. Likewise, that it's been found in plenty of studies that are not faith-based, but that prayer, Aaron, you referenced your spiritual disciplines, you know, that prayer and meditation and that community that we're made for is a mediator to stress. So thank you, gentlemen, for speaking into that, the weaving of self-care into everything. Aaron, what you said, and then Ross, what you said about knowing what's good, helpful, or not helpful for you. So before we leave that to go to our next kind of topic there, I just want to ask both of you, give you one opportunity for a reattack on this. Is there any, that's kind of like an abstract thing. We've talked concretely about biometrics, but is there any other concrete way, examples? It might be intensely personal to you, or you've seen your colleagues do, but what are some concrete examples of ways that that people deal well with stress? How have you dealt with either personal or professional stress?
So I've got a little bit of a list, but one of the, and maybe I can touch on them briefly. One of them is talking to others. It's that shared person that you can talk with. Another one is, I don't know if you use the expression to have thick skin. For me, that means to be prepared for almost anything. Don't be surprised, because something may come up. And one man that I was working with, he had a problem as a Christian in ministry of going to prostitutes. And for some people, that could completely rock their world. If you're prepared for anything, like, yeah, okay, this is a situation we have to work through. Activity, like I say, sports activities. Hobbies, what do you love doing, right? Whether that's music or painting, not just sports, but those other areas as well. Another one is getting oneself in an environment that takes one out of a stress zone. I come from New Zealand, my home country. The best environment for that is when there's a wild day and I'm beside the sea and the waves are crashing, the wind's blowing. It's like, I'm not thinking about stress. I'm enjoying God's creation right there. So that's environment. Eating, enjoying food, plan to enjoy food. Cook if you love to cook. You don't love to, if you're not a very good cook, get together with somebody that is. Another way, obviously, is referring to experts. We're generally speaking good at referring other people, but not very good at referring ourselves, right? So there are people that have dealt and know how to help us. So talk to them. And then one thing to avoid, there's a number of things to avoid, but during these times, there's a lot of negative input, that whether that's negativity that comes from negative self-talk, or whether that's negativity from other people, or especially the media. The more you're exposed to that, and less you're exposed to God's truths and God's hope, the more it affects. So that would be my last one.
Yeah, I mean, not much to add to Ross's list. It's a pretty good list. I'll just add this, and it kind of addresses Coleman's question. You asked a really great question about this. I remind myself that I am not a chaplain. I am not a pastor. I'm not a coach. I am first and foremost Aaron Fuller, a child of God, within whatever religious tradition you follow. And why that matters to me is because I think what it reminds me is that it's not selfish to need to be cared for, because, well, as a child of God, the things that we afford the people we care for, or we try to connect to people that we care for, those same things are afforded for us too through the Almighty. And I think where we can kind of tangibly, if there's a tangible practice, finding a way to embody grace in your life so that you are receiving grace. So whether that's self-forgiveness, whether that's what I call like agents of grace, they're the people in my life that I know that if I tell them, hey, we got to talk, and they just kind of drop what they're doing and they'll tell me the truth. But they'll also like stick it out with me. I've got maybe 2 or 3 people in my life. They're kind of those people. I think that's the thing I would offer for you in this kind of balance and selfishness, that you have to find a way to embody grace in your life and afford yourself the opportunity to experience God's grace through those embodied ways. If you can't do that, if you're in I would argue you're in a really tough place. If that's something that you're unable to do, and that might be a really big flag that you need to talk to an expert of some sort, or somebody to really kind of dig into that, because there's something deeper going on there. But I think if we can connect to that, and that idea that we're children of God, it's not selfish to receive or to take time for the things that we tell our people to take time for.
That's really good, Aaron. You anticipated one of our questions that came in by the chat. Is how do you draw a line between self-care being a bit selfish and self-consuming versus this is just a matter of health, like anything else? You anticipated that very well. And like for me, I have a set of guys that I meet with every Tuesday morning for coffee, and have for 27 years, because they're those guys that I know if I'm in the emergency room, they're going to show up. Those are the guys I can just kind of bare my soul with. And this is killing me, guys. And they don't judge me. They say, man, they stand there in it with me. Having those kind of folks around is really important. And what I hear you saying, it's what may be the greatest stress reliever is a reminder of who you are in terms of identity more than your role. Have you found that to be true for you, Aaron, as well as Ross?
Yeah, I think so. We live in a different time. I think the role of kind of spiritual, like guide and whatever pastor, whatever term we're using. The days are gone where it's just like, people just kind of like take and don't think about. So I know for me, like with other people, they actually kind of look at me odd when I don't model, because they're actually people I think are getting better about boundaries. And so when I say, hey, I can't talk today, but can we talk tomorrow? Do funeral planning. They're like, yeah, that works. Like my athlete, I'm like, hey, I can't talk today because I need to take time for myself. They're like, no, that's cool. We can just do it tomorrow. So I would offer that to you, Coleman, and everybody else, is that your people are not expecting what you are putting pressure on yourself to give. And so, take that as kind of like a measure of confidence that like people will actually respect you probably more and actually think it's normal for you to have good boundaries and say, hey, like today is not a really great day for me to do this. Can we do it tomorrow? I think you might be surprised at what people's responses are.
Yeah, that's really good, Aaron. The little wee bit that I would add to that is I think sometimes we of ourselves can be really strong, strict taskmasters. The expectations I have of myself can be high. And so showing this I battle with a little bit myself. And yet to people that I work with, I can show a lot of grace, right? I can show a lot of understanding and a lot of grace. And so one of the best ways to think of it is, so I show those people grace, why can't I show myself the same grace? And I think that helps me mentally, right? And that's a good example that you gave there, Aaron.
Good. I have one more question I'd like to ask you here. What do you think about this statement? You can only lead people where you are willing to go. Have you thought about this in terms of the whole self-care issue? You can only lead people where you are willing to go. Do you find that to be truthful or just cliche?
That one elicited strong reactions to me because mainly I'm like, that may be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. There are lots of things. There are lots of places I can't go that other people can go. It's like, I think that's my experience. That's the beauty of the sport of wrestling, which is kind of, my sport, is that there are certain things I can't do because my athletes can do it. It's fascinating to watch sometimes my athletes do stuff. I'm like, how in the heck did you do that? Well, it's because of their body type and the gifts that they have. They're, and this and that. And I just, you learn and grow from that. The best leaders, we do live in kind of this idea, and I think it's a Western idea, right? Of the leader has to kind of be this lead from the front, for those of you that know, like a Patton or, or Churchill or, whatever, that's the kind of leader we have to be. But I would think, I would offer that the best leaders today understand their limitations and are able to optimize a team of people and really empower subordinates or those that they're coaching or, or whatever structure you're in to fill those gaps, because you can only do so much. And I just don't, and I know for me, there are just certain limitations I have, like right now I'm supervising a team of 5 different chaplains, and they, I can't do some of the things that they do because they're better at it. They're gifted. And so I really try to put them in situations where they can take the lead on that and they can kind of own that. Because at the end of the day, I can't go there. Like, there are just certain things I'm not, good at. One of them pragmatically is I'm not a Roman Catholic priest, so I cannot do mass. It's just, I can't go there with people. And I think that's true on so many things, but I have found in my own experience, the more and more I understand my limitations and invite other people to help me, because I am, as kind of self-disclosure, I like to do everything. I like to try to do everything. I don't like relying on people. Nobody does. It's like God calls us to, but yet, it's like, yeah, that's great, God, for everybody else, but just not me. Yeah. So I think, because I'm starting to ramble here, but yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is that I don't think that's a helpful statement. I think it's better to understand your limitations and understand who else can come alongside you. Because at the end of the day, it's not about you or me. It's about, the people we're serving. So,
Ross, I know your typical approach is one more of a team effort. Would you say similar thoughts to what Aaron expressed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big challenges in leadership is leaders that have a cap, and they will only lead people that will come up to that cap, or that lid, or whatever you want to call that ceiling. For me personally, I'm actually always trying to find leaders that are better than me at certain things. I want to delegate. I want them to be better than me. And there's certain leaders in certain areas, they don't have to be very good to be better than me in some areas, such as IT. But actually, when I first read your question, and I did wonder, did you actually mean this? I also understood leading people where they may not feel like going. And I think that's a significant one as well. Especially in times where it's more challenging, like COVID times. And I would say, from the purpose of safety and security, there are times when we need to act as a first responder, like a first aid person or somebody like that. And you got to lead them strongly to get them to a safe place. The follow-up work's going to come after that, but you've got to lead them strongly. Yeah, I had a couple more points there, Roger, but I think because of your time being tight, I'll just pause at that.
Okay. My final question for the day is, are there any summary thoughts that you'd give to our sports chaplains and character coaches related to caring for yourself and not just being haphazard about how you treat yourself and how you manage your own mental health as you serve in the sporting community? Any final summary thoughts?
So I had a list, but I'm we've touched on a number of them, and a couple of things that we didn't is, one is related to time. The one related to time is, often we have long-term plans, but when things are difficult, you've got to adjust your plan. And sometimes it's living day to day, and that's okay. So do that, that's absolutely okay. And the other one that I encourage, and it almost sounds like an oxymoron, but it goes back to the greatest commandments. And during times of difficulty, if you can be generous, if you can think of loving and caring for others, it actually does help us ourselves. I don't mean it our own major detriment, but I just mean even showing love in acts of kindness, even acts of kindness that we may not be thinking to get something back or even acknowledged from it. So those would be the two that probably we haven't touched on today.
Very good, Aaron.
Yeah, I think it's, I've seen this with my colleagues, and it's a really big problem actually within the military. And I think it's true within like private chaplain, civilian chaplaincy and like pastoral leadership. We, for whatever reason, choose not to be vulnerable with each other as colleagues. And the primary thing we're constantly kind of pushing on people is to be vulnerable, but we won't be vulnerable with each other. And I think I think it's an indictment on like all of us as a community of spiritual leaders. We just view each other as somewhat, for whatever reason, is adversarial or with skepticism. And my challenge to all of you, because it's my challenge, I've been trying to work and try to break through this idea that we can't care for each other. it's absurd to me to think that as chaplains, we can't like pick up a phone and call a colleague or take time to notice in a colleague that's not doing well, or tell our colleagues, I'm not doing well, can we talk? Because we're too afraid what they're going to think, or it's going to get back to a bishop or a superintendent or, you know, a chief of chaplains, or like within the military context, I'm afraid a colleague is going to use that against me for promotions. That is probably the one thing I'd offer as a takeaway, is that how do we as a community of spiritual leaders develop a community of care for ourselves? I kind of a personal thing, as someone who really believes in the power of mental health and encourages that. That's not something that I seek out for myself. I primarily reach out to, I have my own pastors and chaplains that I seek out, because most of my struggles are when it comes to self-care are usually around, I guess, you know, it's called moral injury clinically. It's kind of those kind of moral questions about things that people are doing or something that people are going through, and kind of understanding the justice of it. You know, that for me recently living here in Minnesota, just talking with people about, you know, what's happened here with George Floyd and with the race relations in the United States, and watching people who are faithful to following God, but saying really horrible things contrary to what, you know, what we read in scripture and understand through tradition, because they do believe that people are lesser than, and they tend to be power. They believe that a certain group of people, African Americans, are lesser than, and you know, and just I need to reconcile with that, and I seek out, you know, clergy and their colleagues too, because is there a risk in that? Yeah, they could go back to my bishop, but at the end of the day, I think we have to do that, because most of our clergy just put themselves on an island, and it's not a good place to be.
My mentor is fond of mentioning a text from Song of Solomon. It says, "They made me keeper of the vineyard, but my own vineyard I have not kept." And we fall prey to that.
Indeed. Thank you, Roger. And thank you, gentlemen, for your answers there. So team, we're going to turn the corner into Q&A. So you can drop it in the chat or unmute yourself. And while giving you a chance to think through what questions you might like to ask of Aaron and Ross, just by way of recap, thank you for your summary comments. Ross kind of boiling down to time and generosity. Aaron boiling down to vulnerability. These are things, you know, time, adjusting your plans. That's really the principle of Sabbath. Roger, you mentioned, you put from Song of Solomon, Sabbath is one of the big 10 for a reason. You know, you once were free, then you were made slaves. Now I've made you free, and this is how you stay free. You know, that was the whole context of the 10 Commandments. Sabbath is part of staying free. And generosity, you know, that's one of the ways we get oxytocin. It's something we need. Vulnerability, again, Aaron, you're talking about modeling what we preach. You know, practice what we preach. People respect that. So thank you, guys. So with that in mind, as we turn the corner into Q&A, I don't know if anybody's had a chance to think of something, would like to unmute. Roger will catch you there, or drop it in the chat, and we'll take it for these gentlemen. Thank you.
Yep. Ross has to leave momentarily. He has other obligation. So if you can ask quickly, we might get Ross, but otherwise Aaron's going to be well equipped to answer our questions.
I got a question. Man, this has been a phenomenal time of learning. So I appreciate y'all putting this on. So I'm here at TCU doing sports chaplaincy character coaching. And one of the things, especially when COVID first hit, sharing the burdens and bearing the burdens of our student athletes that I do one-on-ones with, that are like, "Coach, can I come to your office and talk today? This is what I'm dealing with." I'm like, "Yeah." So what I found is man, it broke me mentally and put me in a position where I needed to be in therapy myself. And so I just wanted to hear y'all's thoughts on like bearing your athletes' burdens and how do you steward that well while simultaneously providing self-care for yourself?
Great question. Thank you.
Maybe I can quickly answer my part of that. Just one hint there, Coleman, for you, and then I will have to leave. I apologize. So one thing that I would strongly recommend is almost like, have you got or getting somebody like almost like a chaplain partner or a co-chaplain. I remember for me working in basketball, and we did a prayer before a basketball game, and one of the guys in the team, I was there on my own this day, and one of the guys in the team did a Muslim chant in the middle of it, right? And I'm like, what the heck do I do with that? And when I talked to my other chaplain mate, he had said, well, he'd talked to the coach about it and had come up with an approach. And I'm like, oh, that just made things so much easier for me. I didn't have to go and confront. I didn't have to do a lot of heavy processing. I didn't have to do a thing of, am I honoring God? Because I had that partner. And it's sort of like that Luke 10 passage where, you know, they're sent out in twos. So that would be the one that I would strongly recommend. If you don't have somebody, try and find somebody. And if you do, you're on the right track. Just dialogue together. That's great. Roger and Marla and you all, I'm sorry that I do have to go.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, I'm Coleman. It's a good question. So I'm one of my self-care things is I'm a kind of a voracious reader. And I like to, and I've learned, I had a good leader of mine tell me this, is that knowledge decreases apprehension. So it just makes it easier to draw from. So like one of my things, my wife is like, you read no like fiction, you just read like these heavy research books. I'm like, yeah, because they're awesome. But you know, I think one of the topics I think what would be helpful, especially, you know, there's some research there's some stuff that's being done in terms of looking at like compassion fatigue and burnout, especially around the topic of moral injury. So I would encourage you to get familiar with moral injury. It's most of the research you'll see is manifest in like military combat scenario environments, but what they're missing, and I think this is an opportunity for like research, is that what happens when caregivers primarily, and we're talking chaplains because these are the conversations we have with people, kind of the moral ethical dimensions. What does it mean when we're hearing these stories over and over and over, and that just builds up to the point where like, what do I do with all these stories? What do I do with all these experiences? And that can manifest itself in what they call a moral injury, which looks like post-traumatic stress and a lot of other mental health things. But what they find is that the naming naming it as moral injury changes the approach to how you heal, like how you kind of recover from it. And you're seeing this right now in healthcare. It's emerging in healthcare with the pandemic because they're watching, there's about 2 or 3 nurses that I talk with, and they're just like, their struggle isn't trauma, seeing horrible things. Their struggle is that people are coming in and not taking the measures that could keep them safe, and now they're on their deathbed, and they're asking like, what happened? And the nurses are just like, I want to just wring their necks, Aaron, because there's a means for them to, and it's a justice issue. I think I think that's another thing too. Sometimes I just think about the injustice of everything I hear sometimes, and that's a sign for me that I know I need to go talk to somebody, because my personality, that injustice, the anger will well up and kind of store up. So so I think that would be helpful, maybe, as well too. I think what was said before, I think in terms of finding a teammate and those kind of things. But I find that sometimes reading on a topic helps name it for me so that I can better address it for myself too.
Right. So as we are wrapping up our time here, just we'll mention back to what Aaron was saying about reading, if that is helpful to you. He mentioned military context, just some other context if it's interesting for you at all. The Body Keeps the Score. This guy, Bessel van der Kolk, it's a little more of an academic read, but incredible. On the Threshold of Hope, Dr. Diane Langberg deals specifically with the topic of sexual abuse. So I know that's maybe a more narrow scope than what we're talking about here. But what's amazing about it, she also wrote In Our Lives First, just how we deal with us as leaders. I'll circle back and end with a concept from On the Threshold of Hope. But lastly, I'll mention emotionally healthy spirituality, emotionally healthy leadership. Just deals with our own self-care. If you are a reader, these are some other ones that are a little more general. I don't know, Aaron, if you have any comments on any of that before I wrap our time up with one concept from On the Threshold of Hope.
Yeah, I mean, I pushed a ton of research stuff. I'm going to throw my email up in the chat. So if there's anything in particular you're looking for, there is a lot of research being done on the benefits of the place of role of spirituality in care, whether it's self-care or your own care. And I think it's been super helpful in kind of working in a lot of things. It's been helpful for me, actually, my self-care, to understand some of those things that are going on. So if there's anything, books, articles from that side that I can push you or help you direct, I'll throw my email up here. But thank you to all of you for what you do for so many and what you do for God. It's no small thing. And yeah, just wish you all the best.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah. So a final thought from Dr. Diane Langberg in that On the Threshold of Hope book. She parallels, and Coleman, and this might really resonate with you. Well, she parallels what Jesus went through during Passion Week to, because she's specifically writing about sexual abuse, to that. But I think we can generalize her comments to greater topics. What he went through physically, we get that, but she lands a plane out. He knows what it is to be restrained and had something done to you that you don't want to happen. What he went through emotionally, fear, anger, shame, betrayal, and those are feelings that all of us, regardless of our personal stories, can resonate with. We have been afraid. We've been, Aaron, you mentioned several times shame, moral injury, sometimes being the betrayal by a person or by a system that was supposed to do better, and so just what Jesus went through physically, emotionally, socially, what it did to his relationships that week, all these things. So the verse that says, we don't have a great high priest who's unable to sympathize with us, and so Jesus can look me in the face and say, I know. And so when I am dealing with my own moral injury or the vicarious trauma of listening to what people are bringing to me, there's great comfort, and to use the athletic vernacular, that Jesus has got on the line with me, right? And it doesn't change what has happened or what I'm going through, but it does change my experience of it and the way I choose to think about it. So I figured I'd throw that from Dr. Diane Langberg. Roger, if you'd like to, in closing, let us know what's coming up next month.
Coming up next month on Thursday, 4 November at 11 o'clock Central Time, we're going to talk about life at the speed of sport. We're going to talk about managing time and priorities. Those things fit together. It's both together. That's how we prioritize time, is what do we care about most deeply? What's most important? Came up a little bit in our discussion today, but we'll dive in more deeply next time on 4 November, 11 o'clock Central. Thanks. Thanks, everyone, for your participation today. We're thrilled to have you. Watch for a lot of the details we talked about. Notes and such will be in the show notes, both on YouTube and in our podcast. We will load both of those at our first opportunity if you'd like to refer those to your colleagues and teammates. Thanks, everyone. Bless you. Thank you, Marla. Thanks, Aaron. Y'all were outstanding today.
Thanks. You mentioned the name of the podcast. It's Service and Sport, if you go looking for it.
Yep. Thank you.